Hi, I'd like to talk to you about the digitizing process and a few of the things that the digitizers go through when they're deciding how to put down stitches and how to transform artwork into embroidery. A lot of new embroiderers and new digitizers don't know where to start. I know how to use the tools, or I'm learning how to use the tools, but I really don't know how to start and I really don't know what the process is. Hopefully this video can help with that. A few of the steps that we'll be going over is getting the graphic on screen. That's one of the first things that you'll do, and it's one of the most important. Usually you're going to have some reference artwork, either something you've been working on, drawing on a napkin or a sketchbook, something that you want to create into stitches, or something that you get from a customer. The next thing that you want to do is you'll want to size it to the application that you're going to be doing. If it's a left chest, you want to make it about that size. If it's bigger than that, fit it to your application. That's very important for making decisions as far as stitch types and layering. The next thing that you want to do is plan it out. What kind of stitches am I going to put in there, and in what order am I going to do it? What am I going to sew first? What am I going to sew next? How is that going to layer up? And how am I going to get from one place to the next without trimming, making a very efficient design if we can. Then you will make your final decisions on stitch types and stitch directions. Maybe you'll set up your properties. Some people do this ahead of time, some people do it after, some people have a little bit of a mix. Then you'll input all of your elements. You'll digitize around all of your pieces, get all those input, finish it up. Make sure your properties are set. Make sure you've got everything the way that you want it. You will then sew it out, see how it looks on hopefully the final material that you're going to be sewing it on. Use the appropriate backing, close to the final garment as possible. Look at it. It's probably not going to look like you think it's going to the first couple times you sew it out. You're going to take it back, have your sew out by your computer, look at where things don't line up, where things need a little bit of adjustment, adjust it on your file, sew it out again, try it again, and hopefully after a couple times, you'll get it looking like the way you want it to look. So the first thing that we'll do is get the graphic on screen. And there are a few different ways to do it. The safest way and the easiest way, I think, to do it is to have a graphic file on your computer, and you'll just open it up in DesignShop. So if I go to DesignShop, I can go to File and Open, or I could use the Open icon, and then you'll navigate to where that file is on your computer. The file that I'm going to use for this demonstration is located on local disk C in the Designs folder. Now this folder is one that is loaded when you load DesignShop. It also has a graphics folder inside of that. These are sample graphics that will help with learning to digitize. Unfortunately, I can't see any of them right now because my files of type is set to all embroidery files. If I change this to all graphics, then I can see those graphic files. I also have as a view setting in Windows Explorer, I can see my file extension. That really helps with figuring out what kind of file types I'm looking at. I'm going to open earthday.bmp. Now, depending on the level of software that you have, you will see varying amounts of art files in here. Different levels of DesignShop can handle different types of art files. This one's earthday.bmp. All levels should be able to open this of any of the digitizing levels of DesignShop. Click on Open, and it appears on screen. Other ways I could have done this, I could have imported a graphic file into the project that I'm working on, or if I had a graphics program open, I could copy it all and then paste it into DesignShop, and that would have given me a very similar result. After we get the graphic on screen, we're going to size the graphic. And again, that's very, very important because a lot of the decisions that you make stitch type-wise are based on the size of the element. Is it very, very small? Does it need to be just a single line of stitching one after the other? Is it a little bit bigger than that? Can I do something that's a little more rounded and sculptural? Can I use a satin stitch for that? If it's too big for a satin stitch, if a satin stitch is going to snag and pull out, then maybe I need to think about using a fill. And all of those decisions are going to be based on the size of those elements. So I want to get this scaled appropriately. So let's see how to do that. If I come over into DesignShop, I can click on the graphic file name over in the project view. If I try to just select it in the view window, or if I select the graphics list, I'm not going to have the ability to move or resize my graphic, and that's a bit by design. If I'm digitizing and I accidentally were to grab the graphic and move it, then all of my stuff isn't going to line up, and that's going to be unfortunate. So to scale it, we need to have a very deliberate click on the graphic file name, and then I get a resize edit box around it. If I know the exact file size, the exact size that I want it to be, I can come down on the bottom where the width and the height is displayed. I can click in that box, double click in that box, type what I want it to be, say 3.5. As soon as I hit enter, or as soon as I move my cursor off of that, it will scale immediately. As long as this button is checked, it will remain proportional. That locks that aspect ratio. If I was trying to fit into a certain hoop, I could also come up here to display currently selected hoop. If I right-click on this icon, I can then choose the size of hoop that I want to use. I'm going to choose the 5.85 inch or the 15 centimeter hoop. Hit apply and OK. And now if I left-click on it, that hoop will be displayed on screen. The solid line is the hoop itself, the dotted line is the hoop limit, so I want to stay within that hoop limit. Now it might be easier for me to scale something graphically. If I click on my graphic file name, again, I get that resize edit box around it. I can then click on the corner and scale it any which way I want. If I hold Alt, it will scale from the center out. If I hold Shift, it will scale proportionally. I want to do both, so I'm going to hold both keys, Shift and Alt, and I'm going to scale this up about like that. And now that fits very nicely inside of that hoop limit, and I'm ready to begin planning out my design. And now's when I'm going to start deciding on my layers. What sews first? What sews next? I'm going to think about that. What's background? What's foreground? I'm going to think about colors. Lighter colors don't cover darker colors nearly as easy as the other way around. If I cover something, if I cover a white thread up with a black thread, that's a very easy cover up. So I'm going to consider that. I'm going to consider pathing. How do I get from one place to the next without trimming? Can I do it? A lot of times what I will do is I will print this file out and I will put tracing paper over it. And then I will begin with a pencil and draw all over it, marking what am I going to do first, what I'm going to do next, what kind of stitch types am I going to use. Another thing that I will do when I'm considering pathing and how do I get from one place to the next is I will trace it with my pencil and see if I can get from around my design without picking up my pencil. If I pick up my pencil, then essentially that's going to be a trim, and I want to try to avoid that. Other things that I will consider is push. Which way is my design stitching? If I start in one place and sew, is it pushing a ripple of material? So what I usually want to try to avoid is locking something down with stitching or having an anchor point in a garment and then sewing towards that, because it'll push a ripple of material, and that can give me needle deflection, it can give me thread breaks, not to mention having a big ripple in my design. However, if I start in one place and sew out from that, it will push the ripples of material away from the design and give me a much smoother sew out. All of those things are things that I'm thinking about as I'm planning out my design. So if I look in DesignShop, I've actually overlaid DesignShop with another tool, another software program that allows me to kind of annotate on screen and hopefully show you my thought process a little bit better. So as I'm deciding, I've got kind of a funny color here. Let me choose a different color real quick. There we go. As I'm making these decisions, I will look at my design and I'll say, okay, what are the bigger sections? What's going to be in the background? In this case, it's probably going to be the sky. So I would probably sew the sky first. There we go. So I'm making notes, of course, on my paper. You guys just can't see that, so I'm using my screen instead. First thing I'm going to sew is the sky. That's going to box in a good bit of that, and then I'll decide, what do I want to sew next? How do I want to push that material? So if I've already locked down all of this area with stitching, there we go, you guys are going to pretend that I filled that in with stitching, what would I sew next? And I think I would probably go to this mountain next. If I'm trying to decide what kind of stitches I'm going to use for that, I might even use my ruler to come in and measure across this form. And if I measure from here to here, I am measuring 63, 65 points. That's right around that edge, or right around that zone where satin stitches are getting a little bit too big and they might start to snag and pull out. So I'm probably going to be considering a fill. I might be able to pull off a satin if it wasn't going to get a lot of abuse or a lot of wear. If this was like going on a pillow somewhere, that might work. But if it's going on any kind of garment that's going to get a lot of wash, a lot of wear, I'll probably want to stick to a fill. The other thing that I would consider is in the mountains, if I did these two mountains as satin and then I'd have to do the last mountain as fill, that might look a little bit weird. It might have kind of a disparate look. So I'm going to do all of those as fill. And I think I would do those next. So we'll go 2, we'll go mountains. You're going to pretend that this looks amazing when I'm writing. There we go. So I would do probably 2, 3, 4. So now I've got all of those mountains kind of filled in. This is going to look great. There we go. The next thing that I would sew, I would probably finish off this circle, and I would finish in and fill in the water. I think that would work really well. So where am I at? 4, and now let's go through 4. Now I will fill in this water. Because it's a larger area, I'm probably going to use a fill stitch for that as well. So I'm going to do the C with that. I've got my sky, I've got everything filled in. And now I can begin putting in some of those details. So now I have some decisions to make. Let me clear away the writing that I've got so far. And now I begin to have a little bit of an internal argument. Do I want to sew the trees first? Do I want to sew the sun first? It doesn't really matter at this point. It's kind of up to you. If I sew the trees first, I have a decision to make again. Do I want to sew the tops first, or do I want to sew the tree trunks first? A couple of things to think about. If I sew the trunks first, I can use a satin stitch. They'll be nice and rounded and look like a trunk, and then I can follow it up with the tree top, so the tree top actually covers up that trunk and looks like an actual tree. If, however, and I'm going to draw this on screen so we can hopefully see it a little bit better, if I had done the treetops first, so I could sew in the treetop, fill that in, and then I could travel down underneath that trunk. That's going to get covered up later. Travel under. There we go. Travel back up. All that's going to get covered up later. And then I could fill in this tree. So if I did that, I would avoid a trim, and that might be a little bit more efficient. It's one trim. I'm not super concerned about it. And honestly, I think having that tree top cover up that trunk would be kind of cool. So I think that's what I would do. I would do the tree tops. I would do tree trunks, and then I would finish up with the tree tops. I would do the sun next. Let's see what I would do for the sun. So for the sun, I would consider a couple of different stitch types. I could actually use a satin stitch for all the rays, and I could use a fill for the center sun. What I could actually do is I could travel down, satin back, and then I could travel over and satin back, and I could do this for all the rays. And then when I was done, I would have all these travel stitches in here, and I could cover those up with the fill. So I'm very, very efficient, and yet I have a nice sculptural look with it. So I think that makes a lot of sense for me. And then, of course, lastly, I would fill in those black outlines. I would probably do that last. Clean up all my edges. If something wasn't lining up, I have a satin stitch to go over that edge and clean up that. A lot of times embroidery isn't about being perfect. It's about hiding the fact that you're not. So if I don't have fills that line up, if I border them with a satin stitch, kind of hides the fact that that edge isn't as clean as I might want it to, and a satin edge is always much cleaner than a fill. I think that'll work really well for me. After I get that done, we've already kind of talked about our stitch types and stitch directions. I would then set up my properties. Some people, again, will do this ahead of time. Some people will do it after they've input their elements. I do a bit of a mix. I have some defaults in my software. I always have tie stitches turned on so that I always have those in and I don't have to think about them anymore. I just simply digitize. I have the tie stitches in. I don't have misstarts. I don't have pullouts, and I'm good to go. It doesn't wash out either, which is nice. After I set up my properties, I might set up a few defaults. I would input all of my elements. So go around, trace all my elements, digitize everything. Then I would look at those elements and see, all right, what do I need for underlay for these different pieces? Are my densities appropriate? And I would adjust all of that. Once I got all of that set up and kind of double checked, I would then sew it out on my machine. Hopefully, again, with that appropriate backing and the material as close to my finished product as possible. How does it look? Look okay? Great. Doesn't look okay? A couple pieces are stretching and not looking so fantastic. I can go back into my software with my sew out right beside me, and I can tweak those edges, tweak those settings, and make it look good. Sew it out again, and hopefully then it's looking the way you want it to.